Shavua Tov to everyone. In this week's parasha, we're reading Parashat Chayei Sarah, which actually opens with the culmination, the end of Sarai Imenu's life, where she's buried. And there's a very, very famous verse in the parasha. It says about Avraham Avinu when he comes to old age, he becomes an elderly man. The verse says, "V'Avraham Avinu zaken, v'Avraham zaken, baba yamim." That's the expression that is to this day very commonly used, but it's a very unique expression. Again, Baba Yamim means that Avraham was elderly and coming of age, or coming in days. Now this phrase, Baba Yamim, that he came in his days, or coming of years, is again in its literal meaning can be read in all sorts of manners, and is also again explained and elaborated on by all of our sages and our interpreters of the Torah in a various certain amount of ways. I mean, different aspects. The classic understanding, the interpretation is that Baba Yamim means that he entered. Again, that's one of the literal ways to read the phrase, is that Avraham entered, he penetrated, he filled all of his days. And he utilized and took advantage of every moment, and he filled his days with content. But the Ishbitzer in this parasha, so he states again a similar manner, but he says it in a very unique way that exposes and expresses a very beautiful point. He says that Avraham Avinu, he came of age, he grew old, but he maintained, again, he brought into all his days his mental assets, and that's how he expresses it. He brings this from a midrash. We won't go into the whole midrash because the literal interpretation in Hebrew and English will be difficult to explain. But on one of the midrashim on this verse, we'll just say, again, the basic brief content is that Avraham came to his older age maintaining his cane and his cup. These are the two phrases used in Kohelet about Avraham Avinu, that he became old, but he didn't lose his cane and his cup, his vessel. Now, Ishbitzer contemplates on this, and he says that this is reflecting the two edges, or the two main assets of a person's consciousness that typically are lost with old age. Now, as a person grows older, what usually happens, mentally speaking, psychologically, is that in youth, in our younger years, then a person typically capacitates very large edges. He has very high highs and very low lows. That when his aspirations and his dreams are very very high. I mean, he could dream to be anything between a cowboy and a spaceman, or anything in between. As children, we have very large aspirations on the one hand, and also our falls are usually also very drastic, a tantrum on the floor or something of the sort. But as we grow older, then this tends to iron out, like the edges of our. Very often this point that we've made in different contexts, we very often allegorize it to the monitor in the hospital that starts off with high edges, but eventually it flatlines slowly but surely. And that's the deterioration, the symbolic deterioration of life, that you flatline. You start off with very large edges, and slowly but surely you compromise your edges. Now, the psychological process that a person goes through is that, like we're all familiar with this, none of us are 5 years old, that after aspiring very high and very often falling very low, or being disappointed, or you get this sense of like what we call maturing, but actually it's not really maturing, it's just a deterioration process that I aspired very high and it didn't work out. Or maybe I tapped into very, very deep, low places, and it was very painful for me. And as I grow older, I kind of accustom myself to stay away from the edges. So I stop aspiring too high in order to not fall too low. I don't want to be exposed too low. And slowly but surely, my personality irons out. So if when I was very young, I had a very flexible range of how high I could go and how low I could sink, and therefore also my aspirations were a very broad spectrum of aspirations. But my mentality, my mental capacity, as I grow old, it compromises and it becomes very small until, again, at some point you can't even change the type of coffee you drink, and then you're very close to flatlining. So this is like the deterioration process, the entropic process that our psyche goes through, and we lose our edges. So how he calls these two edges, again, your highs and your lows. He says that a person's cane is his straightforward determination, like a straight stick. So his willingness to go very strongly, like to aspire and set a goal and tread forward toward that goal, that's his cane. And his cup is his deepness, like his falls, his yearnings, and his pain, his sense of lacking, his willingness to expose himself to the deepest, darkest places within himself. That's his vessel, his empty vessel. So a person tends to lose both his lows, his emptiness, the depth of his emptiness, and also the velocity and the strength of his cane, of his distance. And this is what Chazal teach, that Avraham Avinu maintained his cup and his cane, that he maintained his youth, his youthfulness, his great aspirations, and also his very deep, profound sensitivity and awareness of his own personal lacking and emptiness. Again, very, very painful and maybe dangerous edges that a person, as we said, teaches himself subconsciously to compromise as he grows old. So Avraham didn't compromise. He maintained these edges of his personality until his old age. And that's called Shehu Ba Bayamim, that he came, like his full personality, the full breadth of his personality came into his old age. And that's the teaching that Ishbitz brings from this. So the person needs to bring, not to grow old with less of who he is. Like bring all of the edges of your personality into your old age. So this is a full life. So it's a somewhat deeper interpretation of this word that appears in many of our commentators, that into your days, coming of age means that you lead a full life, you pour yourself into your days. But simply, it just means that you fill your days with a lot of good deeds. You don't waste your time. But in the Ishbitz's eyes, it's a much deeper, much more gentle point, that a person needs to not lose his mental assets, bring all of himself. Don't lose the edges of your personality. Don't get ironed out. And really, if a person does this perfectly, this is, in a sense, we won't get into it now, but this is the work of Tanya. This is basically what the book of Tanya is looking to explain, how a correct psychological process is looking to not compromise one's edges, but to tolerate them and even expand them slowly, even though, again, the natural course is an entropic course where a person does compromise his edges and eventually flatline. But what we're actually aspiring to do is first contain our edges and then even expand them. But so again, in very few words, this is what the Ishbitzer says here about Avraham Avinu, that he set the path, the end of this path, like the optimization of this path is really the prophecy and the hope of eternal life, that humanity reaches, like actually negates entropy, like reversing the wheel of entropy and not dying out, not flatlining at all. Chazal also say that in the time of Avraham Avinu is when sickness and old age started. So simultaneously was revealed also like every disease that comes upon humanity, the cure is embedded within the same concept. So in the same time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu makadim refuah lemakayim, Hashem brings the cure prior to the disease. So Abraham's path, Abraham's faith, which needs to be studied and contemplated on, we're not encapsulating it here, but what it's leading to, what it's aspiring to, is for a person to be able to come of age with all of his personality without compromising those edges. So you need to learn how to tolerate your deepest, darkest lows, and how to not lose contact with reality when you soar high, and then you negate that instinctive tendency to compromise your edges as you go along. And not only that, you can even maybe enhance them as you go. So B'ezrat Hashem, we should all merit to encapsulate all of our personality, not grow old, not grow out of our aspirations, and not grow astray from our deepest, darkest places in our soul. And not only that, but even expand them, B'ezrat Hashem, to infinity. Shavua Tov to everyone.